How's it, everyone? This is Local with my final Svalinn Lightning Strike Warden build update. Everyone who's waited for this, thank you for waiting. The PoB is linked in the description. This build, hands down, probably the best build I've ever made. One of the best builds I've ever played. It's fully capable of Wave 15 Simulacrum, Ubers, Tier 17s, all on a decent budget. And if you're looking for truly the most well-rounded beast, this is the build. I'm not going to go over absolutely everything in this because I've done previous build guides on this, but there is a lot of information in the PoB, and I'm just going to go over the changes to the build now. So firstly, let's look at the weapon. I'm using a sai, a dagger. A lot of people have been asking why you're using a dagger. Few reasons for this. Firstly, sai gives us block as an implicit. It also has melee hits fortify as an enchant. It's not too expensive either, so this is a really nice option. If you're using a sword or a claw and you prefer that, that's absolutely fine. I'm also not 100% convinced sai is the best base. You could go for an ambusher. This just allows us to get block capped a little more easily. Also gives us a little bit more damage on the tree because we path up this way and we're able to get this dagger mastery, and then also this dagger mastery, actually we get the benefit of the dagger points on this instead of just the mastery, which gives us the crits of culling strike. Now for people who are new to the build, block, this is our primary avoidance layer. With Svalinn, this shield, all the rage, everyone's using it. This shield allows us to get effectively block capped very, very easily. So currently in game, I'm sitting at 67% chance to block attack damage, 65% chance to block spell damage. This is not the lucky roll, so the actual roll is about 90%, and then the spell block is 88%. The way block works is when you block a hit, you take no damage from it. So 90% of hits that are coming in, we are taking no damage from. Same with spell block. So that is why this shield is so powerful. If you're going to get one of these, aim for as high chance to block spell damage on it. The ward isn't as important. If you're going to get a corrupted one, you can get ones with increased chance to block. You can get increased block cap, which is also pretty cool. But overall, just get a Svalinn. It's not too expensive. Get as good a % chance to block spell damage as possible. Now, speaking about gems that we're putting in the Svalinn, since we're on the topic, I'm going with Molten Shell. Molten Shell is great if you have high armor. Generally about 50k armor, Molten Shell is going to be best in slot. Otherwise, if you have really good endurance charge generation, you could also go for something like Immortal Call, cast when damage taken, but that does take up another gem slot, as that doesn't work. So the bottom line on Svalinn, trigger a socketed elemental spell on block with a 0.25 second cooldown. So because we're blocking so much, we are constantly triggering these spells. Again, for people who haven't seen this shield. Then the next thing, Flame Wall. This pops down a wall of flame, and then when our projectiles fly through it, they get a nice chunk of flat added fire damage, just increasing our damage. Then the next one, Sigil of Power. This places a sigil on the ground. This grants a buff, and as we spend more mana while in that zone, this builds up stages on the Sigil of Power. Now the thing with this, keep this low level unless for some reason your Lightning Strike costs a lot of mana. So currently my Lightning Strike costs 24 mana, and in order to gain a stage, I have to spend 121 mana while in the area. So if this is level 20, I'm not going to ever be building up stages. And as we build up stages, we get added flat lightning damage per stage up to a maximum of 4. And then when we're at a maximum of 4 stages, we get a less damage taken while at maximum stages. So as we spend mana and block, I can actually just hop into, I don't know, let's go into whatever, the Vastiri Desert. I'll show you how this works. So we block, and there's going to be, yeah, that little ring, that's Sigil of Power. And then as I spend mana, we build stages. One of the annoying things about this is the only way to see how many stages you're getting is by these things, these little runes building up on the ground. So you're going to have to just keep an eye out. You do get used to being able to see when you're at max stages. But you'll see there we're at 2 stages. Now there's nothing to hit. Let's spend some more mana. And now it's building up more stages. So keep this low level. Make sure you don't have this at like level 20, because then you're never going to be getting the full benefit of it. A low level, like level 6, where you're actually building up 4 stages, actually does, I think, equivalent, if not more damage than a level 20 that you're only getting 1 stage on. And then, of course, if you're not getting 4 stages, then you're not getting that less damage taken. So, very important. Molten Shell, Flame Wall, Sigil Power. If you're playing with something else like Hydrosphere and it's working, that's absolutely fine too. Let's look at the rest of the gear. Helmet, super simple. Reservation, reduce mana costs of attacks. Most important suffixes on this are probably going to be stuff like Chaos Res, Intelligence. You can also go for something like a Blizzard Crown. If you're going for a Blizzard Crown, in that case, what you would aim for would be using Deafening Essence of Loathing to get that mana reservation as a suffix. And then you're getting a lot of extra damage, but it is going to be a bit more expensive to craft. Prefixes, life, stuff like armor and evasion, and then you can go with socketed AoE gems as a bench craft, or you can go for pierce. Those are all good options. Looking at the chest, most important things we're looking for are the implicits. So from the Searing Exarch, we're getting Tempest Shield has increased buff effect. Tempest Shield grants us 25% increased chance to block spell damage. So a breakpoint would be 20%, because that's 20% times 25, which would give us another 5% chance to block spell damage. So Tempest Shield and the chance to block spell damage, this is giving us another 10% chance to block spell damage. Of course, you could get this higher if you use better Icors and Embers, but you can get a lot of chance to block spell damage. Then we can also bench on increased chance to block spell damage. So from this chest alone, 18% chance to block spell damage. Of course, if you are getting block capped in other places, you don't have to do it like this, but you can get a tremendous amount of block chance on your chest. Suffixes, resistances, chaos res, spell suppression, things like that are all brilliant. As for the prefixes, armor and evasion, and life. However, this does not have life, which you might think, oh, that's bad. However, if you have a chest like this that doesn't have life, what you can do instead is to grab this mastery over here. 15% increase maximum life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armor. So if you can find or craft something like this, just remember about this mastery that you can get that increased life from. Going into the gloves, implicit's very important. Projectiles pierce an additional target. Non-vile strike skills target one nearby additional enemy. A lot of people have been asking, should I push this up to exquisite to get non-vile strike skills target 2 nearby additional enemies? I've yet to be convinced on this. I've tested 2 additional nearby enemies. I just couldn't feel the difference really. If someone's able to convince me otherwise in the comments, let me know. But I could never feel the value of that. But the most important thing is getting that pierce, and then life, chaos res, strength, cold res. If you use essences of spite, getting int. We do need a fairly decent chunk of int to use things like flame wall. But other than that, you could also go for something like temple gloves with the damage against chilled enemies. That's also brilliant. Attack speed's also a great suffix. As for the pierce, on this build, I would aim for minimum 2 pierce. You need at least projectiles pierce 2 additional targets, if not 3, but minimum 2. You can get more targets pierced with increasing that implicit. Projectiles pierce an additional target. I think if you get that up to exquisite, it's projectiles pierce 2 additional targets, and then you can bench on the other one. Also remember, on your helmet, you can get projectiles pierce an additional target. I've gone for the AoE and increased effective AoE gems because it increases the level of my auras, but you can very easily get the +3. Boots. Now, these we do need to talk about. Suffixes, going for resistances, chaos res, prefixes, life, and movement speed, funnily enough, is not that important on this build because we are whirling, blading everywhere. We don't really use our feet all that much. So you don't actually need to prioritize movement speed, which is very strange to say. It's only the #1 thing you get on boots, but you don't really need it. So try to prioritize getting life as a prefix, armor, evasion, all of that. With the new bases, actually getting armor and evasion as prefixes matters a lot because you can get a huge amount of armor and evasion from these new bases. Like you can see, this is 500 armor and evasion, gloves about 250, helmet almost 1,000, and it's not even perfectly rolled. But now these boots, you're seeing something. Chance to avoid elemental ailments. This comes from Essence of Loathing, and it is a solution to using this jewel over here, Ancestral Vision. Now, this build I was playing came from a private league where we did not ever find a Stormshroud. However, we did find Ancestral Vision. So I would not use Ancestral Vision if you're playing Trade League. If you're playing Trade League, instead use Stormshroud. Put a little graphic of Stormshroud on the screen, please. So what Stormshroud does is it means that if you are immune to shock, or you have 100% chance to avoid being shocked, you have also 100% chance to avoid being chilled, frozen, and ignited. And it is much easier to get 100% chance to be shocked from gear than it is to get overcapped on Ancestral Vision. So the way Ancestral Vision works is if we have 100% chance to suppress spell damage, we have 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments. Then down on the tree over here, this is giving us another 20% chance to avoid elemental ailments. So combined 70% chance to avoid elemental ailments. And then with the boots, there's another 35% chance to avoid elemental ailments. So we are ailment immune with our Ancestral Vision in, which I can show you over here. 106% chance to avoid elemental ailments. But rather go for the Stormshroud. With Stormshroud, you can get the implicit chance to avoid being shocked on boots. You can also use Essence of Torment to get a suffix chance to avoid being shocked. You can also, on a belt, get chance to avoid being shocked with the Essence of Torment. Do I have one? Torment. Over here, yep. Essence of Torment, belt, 56 to 60% chance to avoid being shocked, and also on other armor, chance to avoid being shocked. So with that, plus the points on the tree, we can get 80% chance to avoid being shocked. The other 20%, that can come from the implicit on your boots, or you can get up to 50% chance to avoid being shocked just from an Abyss Jewel. Belt, Tides of Time. This is such an excellent belt, but if you're primarily mapping, I would rather use something like a Stygian Vise, or you can even go Headhunter. Mageblood, not on this build. This is probably the worst build in the history of Path of Exile to use Mageblood. It's completely wasted. We're using Tinctures, so Mageblood, we're only getting 2 Flask benefits, so don't use Mageblood. If you prefer using Headhunter and it's working for you, stick with it. But if you're bossing, Tides of Time is brilliant. So this rolls 0 to 3 charges every 3 seconds, life, mana, utility. For the purposes of our build, we want to get 3 charges every 3 seconds on life and utility like I have. I believe this costs 1 divine in Trade League. However, the most important thing, and so good, 100% increase life recovery from Flasks. This is a massively, massively overlooked modifier that a lot of people don't think about, but this actually solves the recovery for damage over time on this build if we're using a Flask. Actually, let's just get into the Flask right now, speaking about Tides of Time. So, for the entire history of PoE, everyone will say use an instant recovery on low life, divine life flask with immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood. However, eternal life flask actually is better on this build. This gives us, I think, a little bit less recovery, but it's over a shorter period of time. So this is giving us a huge amount of life recovery very quickly. So 4,000 life over 3 seconds, about 1,300 life every second. That is being multiplied by increased life recovery from Flask. So This is pretty much giving us about 60% of our life pool every second. However, also, you can get other modifiers like this. Let me just show you. Flask, things like this. Recover an additional 39% of Flask's life recovery amount over 10 seconds when not used on full life. Something like this is actually an excellent second Flask for bossing. So if you're not at full life, this thing is giving us 40% of 4,000 would be another 1,600. So this thing would be giving us about 5,600 life multiplied by 1.2. It's insane recovery. And then also combined with Soul of Rislatha, we're gaining 3 charges every 3 seconds if we haven't used a life flask recently, and 60% increased life recovery from flasks when used and low life. So I can show you the POB quickly, and you can see over here, full-bodied Eternal Life Flask of Allaying is giving us 13,800 life over 2.3 seconds. That is like our entire life pool is being refilled constantly. And then if we pop in something like that other life flask, this one, you can see it's going to be even higher. So we add to build, pop that in. This is giving us 15,000 over 2 seconds, and then an additional 1,400 over 7 seconds. If we're, let's say, on low life, this is now giving us 19,000 over 2 seconds. So this is actually enough for us to stand in uber ground degens. Maven, Shaper, you can stand in those ground degens and your life will actually be going up instead of down. So I love Tides of Time for bossing. I actually do use it for mapping too, but this, if you're looking to do ubers, is really, really good for degens. Let's go over the jewelry quickly. So the Taming, still super good. Make sure you get as high a roll as possible and increase elemental damage with hits and ailments for each type of elemental ailment on enemy, and then use a Turbulent Catalyst to get 20% quality on that. Yoke of Suffering, for people who followed along, took me over 120 maps to get this in our private league, but this is really, really big damage. It also provides us a nice chunk of attributes and resistances, but the main thing, enemies take 9% increased damage for each type of ailment you've inflicted on them. This effectively functions as a more multiplier. So on our builds, we're applying Freeze, Shock, Ignite, Chill, Poison, Bleed. Those are now, if we apply all those ailments to enemies, we're getting, I think, about 45 to more damage from this Yoke of Suffering alone. This is just huge, huge damage. If you're playing, let's say, SF or a private league, you can go for the Anvil. The Anvil is such a sick amulet for... It just provides us a huge amount of block chance, life gain on block, all those sorts of things. You can also probably get a double corrupted one of these in trade league with, I don't know, additional curse, chance to block, also max res, all sorts of other good things. So if you are an Anvil enjoyer, you can absolutely use this. But the Yoke, so good, so good for damage. As for the Anoint, there are quite a few options. It really depends on what you want. So I'm using As the Mountain. This gives us a nice % chance to block attack damage and also max chance to block attack damage. However, there are other options. So previously I was anointing Testudo. This gives us life gain on block and chance to block attack damage. A lot of people are using things like Smashing Strikes to get endurance charges on melee strike. Also things like Disciple of the Unyielding to get endurance charges on kill. Stuff like Rage. You can also anoint Sovereignty if you want to get a bit more reservation. This is really up to you. As the Mountain is just the best block chance anoint that you can put on. So that's up to you. Ring. Nimis, it's just too good. If you can afford this ring, it is hands down the biggest damage increase for the build, bar none. There's nothing better than this. It effectively doubles your damage, if not more. So Nimis it means that all your projectiles return to you, but they are fired in random directions. Initially, this feels a bit weird, but the damage increase is so worth it, and you get used to it very quickly. So, if you cannot afford a Nimis, instead what you're going to do in your 6th link is, we're not going to use Awaken Elemental Damage with attacks, you will use a Returning Projectile support, but that gives you, I think, 70% less damage on the Returning Projectile. So the reason Nimis is so good, not only allows us to use a different 6th link that doesn't reduce the damage of our returning projectiles, but also the returning projectiles don't do less damage. So if you're looking to spend currency, you've got all your other stuff, Nimis just is so good, literally doubling our damage. Well, I don't want to say literally, but I don't know exactly how the math works, but I'm pretty sure it effectively doubles our damage with Nimis. If you cannot afford it, like I said, just use Returning Projectile, and then the other ring slot, you could use something like an Amethyst ring for more resistances, attributes, life. If you don't need all the attributes and life and stuff, you could slap in another Taming for another good chunk of damage. But yeah, if you got currency, don't even think about it. Nimis, hands down, best ring that you can get for the build. Looking at the Flasks and Tinctures, now, Tinctures, I've gone over a million times. We want to go Prismatic Tincture, increase effect and melee weapon attack speed. That's the prefix and the suffix. And then Rose Thorn Tincture, increase effect, and then penetrate elemental resistances. This gets us crit capped so easily, so easily. As for the other flasks, Basalt Flask, or you can use a Granite Flask. You can get gain a charge when you're hit by an enemy. As for the suffix, evasion rating or armor, either works on this. As for the other flasks, you can go for something like a Silver Flask with increased armor or evasion as a suffix, and then you can get chance to gain a charge on crit or max charges. As for the enchant, used when charges reach full. The reason I'm not going for a Jade and a Granite Flask, I actually noticed that the flat armor that you're getting from Granite is great, but you're actually getting so much armor from your gear, armor and evasion from your gear, that you can be a little bit greedy and instead go for a Silver Flask. If you have boots where you have benched on chance to gain onslaught on kill, then you could swap out this Silver Flask for something like a Jade or Granite. Basalt is just giving us more armor, which is great, but if you're mostly mapping, you can rather just bench on or unveil movement speed, chance to get onslaught on kill, and then get your onslaught that way. But if you're bossing Silver Flask, super good. And then we've gone over the Life Flask, so don't go for the instant recovery. Something like this feels so good. I actually want to do a video on this because of how impactful this is for the build. And then for our Pantheons, I remembered for once, Soul of Arakali. We want to get this fully upgraded. It's giving us a massive amount of defense against damage over time. So Soul of Arakali, and then Soul of Rislatha. So this is the ideal Pantheon for bossing. If you're mainly doing Ubers, you want to go for Rislatha. It's going to refill your life flask much more quickly and give you that increased life recovery from flasks when on low life. If you are mapping and you're doing, let's say, Exarch, then you want to go for Soul of Abarath. That is going to give you the Burning Ground immunity. Or you could use Ralakesh to get the Moving While Bleeding. It doesn't cause you to take extra damage. As for the other ones, I don't really feel like any of the other ones are too useful except for Soul of Yugel. So if you accidentally roll a map with Reflect Elemental Damage, which generally will kill you, even if you have Awakened Elemental Damage with attacks level 5, because your Whirling Blades will still get you killed, what you can do is go Soul of Yugel. This gives you 50% reduced reflected damage taken. And then over here on the Elemental Mastery, you can change this just temporarily for one map. The other mastery is 60% reduced elemental damage taken. So this with the Soul of Yugel will make you immune to reflect if you're doing stuff like Atziri or whatever. Now, another important thing to note with blocking is that if you take a hit that would have stunned you, but you block it, you actually play a block recovery animation. So if you're mapping and you're blocking a lot and you're getting hit a lot by hits that would have stunned you, you're essentially getting stun locked. So you do need to be stun immune. So over here, I have 100% chance to avoid being stunned. How do you get this? There are a few ways. So firstly, over on the tree, we have chance to avoid being stunned over here by Perfectionist. This is actually hit by this massive thread. I think you can get chance to avoid being stunned on boots as well. However, another great way to get chance to avoid being stunned is just with tattoos. So over here, tattoo of the Salio Tideshifter, 10% chance to avoid being stunned. You can just pop in a few of these until you are stun immune. Very important to get stun immune. Chance to avoid being stunned, chance to avoid being stunned. Just pop in as many as you need of these. And don't forget, you can also grab Perfectionist, which is also hit by our Lethal Pride, which we'll get into in a sec. As for the rest of the gem links, they are fairly straightforward. Stuff like Whirling Blades, Blood Rage, Frost Blink for movement, Sniper's Mark, Mark on Hit, Life Tap. These same as they were, Arrogance, Clarity, and Precision. Now, Precision, I'm keeping this level 1 for now because I have the hits can't be evaded on my dagger. If you have a triple damage prefix dagger instead, which is actually ideal, then instead level up your precision and grab these points on the tree over here to just get your accuracy capped. There's also some other things that are hit by a massive thread, like global accuracy rating over here, and then Path of the Hunter for a bit more accuracy rating. But this is a nice solution to accuracy that frees up a few points on the tree, but try and get a triple damage prefix. You can also then get accuracy tattoos to push up that accuracy rating, but then precision level 20 if you're going that route. As for the rest of the gems, they're really not worth getting into, but you can check them in the PoE. But very important, I need to talk about the auras because I've been changing these around a little bit depending on the content I'm running. So let me just grab these over here and these. So if you are bossing, doing big bosses, Ubers, then the auras I would opt for would be Haste, Anger, and Herald of Ice, linked with an Enlighten. So these are just damage, which is very important for Ubers. Things like Sirus don't even do physical attacks, so things like Determination don't even really help all that much. So bossing, Haste, Anger, and Herald of Ice. If you're mapping and you don't really care about dying here and there, it's not like this build's very tanky, but if you don't really care about dying, then you can use this setup for mapping too. However, if you are pushing for experience, then what you want to do instead is go for the Determination, the Arctic Armor, and the Grace. These all combined will make you extremely tanky. I can just show you over here. So my armor is sitting at about, let's put on our flasks, sitting at 72,000. So with these auras on, you have just a very, very nice physical mitigation layer on top of everything else. Without these, we're sitting at, let's just check, the greedy version of the build, sitting at 13,000 armor. In this case, even using like a molten shell's a bit but with our flasks up, still sitting at about 30,000 armor with the greedy aura setup. So if you're pushing for XP, you want to get to that level 100, Determination, Grace, Arctic Armor. If you don't care about dying here and there, or you're doing bossing, Herald of Ice, Haste, and Anger. And now, let's get into the tree, the final piece of the puzzle. Okay, starting at the top of the tree. So if you're going daggers, you want to grab Backstabbing with Dagger Mastery. This gives us 40% crit multi for skills supported by Nightblade. That's great. Watcher's Eye. There's actually tons of good Watcher's Eye mods. I've listed a lot of the good ones in PoB, I think along with a trade link that you can check out, but you can go for Precision, Attack Speed, Crit Multi, Anger, depending on which ones you're using. So check out the PoB for suggestions. Marks Over here, mark the prey. If you are bossing, 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge when you hit your marked enemy is pretty nice. And then over here, life, and then this life mastery. If your body armor has life, do not take this. Then dagger mastery, critical strikes have culling strike. We are always critting, so we effectively are permanently culling. Now, heading over this way before we look at the cluster. Evasion mastery, chance to suppress spell damage if helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots have 15% evasion rating, which they do. So there's another 15% evasion rating. Just don't get baited by Revenge of the Hunted. 10% chance to suppress spell damage while at full life. Just make sure you are spell suppression capped without full life. If you are using Arrogance to add in a low level clarity and precision, by the way, this is a fairly low level clarity, then you won't have to worry about that. But if you're not doing that, don't get baited by that. Tinctures. Colloidal mixture. We want to grab this, and we want to grab practiced reapplication. As for the masteries, the first 6 mana burn applied to you have no effect is actually pretty important. I took it off just while testing yesterday, but do go for that first 6 mana burn applied to you have no effect. The other mastery that I previously was using, Tinctures deactivate when you have 12 or more mana burn. That is really nice as it allows you to get into a rhythm with your tinctures, but I've decided to take it off and just pay attention to my tinctures, and it actually feels absolutely fine. So if you want to save a point, test that, see how it feels. If you feel like your tinctures are down too much and you're not getting into a rhythm with it, you can put back that point. And then also go for the first 6 mana burn applied so you have no effect. That is actually more important. On League Sot, the Enduring Suffusion, this was bugged, and I think the way it was working was that Tinctures applied to you have less mana burn rate. I think it actually had more mana burn rate, so we were hitting that 12 very quickly and not really noticing the first 6 mana burn. However, I think they fixed it, and after they did, then this first 6 mana burn applied to you, you actually started to feel it. So do grab that. Then Charisma, and then getting Inveterate, crit over here, reduce mana cost of attacks, and 12% mana reservation efficiency of skills, life. And over here, Primeval Force with hits of 25% chance to treat enemy resistances as inverted. Entrench, over here, Thick Skin, and this is really good. Fangs of Frost with enemies permanently take 5% increased damage for each second they've ever been frozen, you up to a maximum of 50%. This, again, effectively acts as a more multiplier as far as I understand it. If you, again, are doing bossing, uber bossing, with the Unbound Avatar, which, I mean, I've gone over this. This is like our ulti as we build up elemental ailments on enemies. Once we reach 100, we can go Unbound, giving us 80% more damage, and we always apply elemental ailments, even against bosses, like uber bosses. So this Cold Mastery actually does make sense on this build, because we are absolutely getting that max 10%, max 50% from 10 seconds of freeze on bosses even. So bossing, super good. Again, if you're primarily mapping, you may not want to take that, but bossing, simulacrum, stuff like that, this is really good. Then over here, going for this little block wheel over here, this gives us 25% chance to gain an endurance charge when you block, always pretty much at max endurance charges, except maybe against Ubers, which is a little bit scuffed, but again, you can change your Anoint and maybe get something different. As for the block mastery, 1% chance to block spell damage for 5% chance to block attack damage. Super important. If we take this off, our chance to block spell damage is 65. If we take that off, it drops down to 58. So getting a nice little chunk of chance to block spell damage there. And then, very important, is Iron Reflexes. This converts all our evasion rating to armor. So the reason we are doing this is evasion rating acts as an avoidance layer. However, block acts as an avoidance layer too, a better avoidance layer. So by rather converting all our evasion into armor, we're converting that evasion into a mitigation layer, which is what we really need, because we're getting so much avoidance from this Svalinn. Rather, beefing up our mitigation layer with the Iron Reflexes is just way higher value. And then, very important, don't overlook this. We need to grab this. Very important, don't overlook this little hanging point. Bleed and crit chance. Attacks have a 10% chance to cause bleeding. This is important for our Yoke, getting another 10% increased damage if we make them bleed, which we do. And then over here, this little poison wheel, chance of poison. So we're poisoning, bleeding, freeze shock, igniting, Yoke is suffering, getting a lot of damage. Then I actually changed my build a little bit yesterday for Ubers, but a very, very nice poison mastery here. Enemies poisoned by you cannot deal critical strikes. This gives us effectively not 100% crit immunity, but effectively you will feel crit immune with this. It's not quite as good as having like 100% reduced extra damage taken from critical strikes, but this is super nice. So if you want to beef up, tank up, then get that enemy poisoned by you cannot deal critical strikes mastery. That's very, very, very important. Now, looking at this massive thread of hope. This, I would say, is very good, but it is also optional. If you don't feel like this thread of hope is worth it, then you don't have to use it, but it is hitting a ton of good stuff. We're getting reservation over here, life, we're getting increased damage, attack speed, increased damage. Over here, hitting that stun avoidance thing over here, force of nature. Aspects of the links, super good, giving us a bit of attack speed, movement speed, crit chance. Weapon artistry, giving us 0.2 meters to melee strike range. A lot of people really value melee strike range quite highly. They want to push that number up to like 0.3, 0.5. So you can get that, but the main thing is just we're getting block, attack speed, melee strike range, super good point. Quick step for more chance to suppress spell damage. And then over here we're getting some accuracy. Over here getting accuracy. Of course, if you're not using the hits can't be evaded. Then the lethal pride. I have done tons of videos on the lethal prides, so I've listed out different things we need, but stuff like rage on hit, and this is being hit by our massive. These two synergize super nicely. So we're getting rage on hit, stuff like regen, that's super nice. Melee crit strike chance, not that good. Fire resistance, very important. Armor, and then over here, strength, fire resistance, totem placement speed. The main totem placement speed, by the way, completely worthless. The main thing we're looking for are things like rage on melee hit, very, very important. And then intimidate, also good. And then another big one is chance to deal double damage. Those are the big, big damage ones. Then there are a ton of other good ones that are sort of bonuses. So things like increased fortify and armor and fire resistance. Those are all super good too. But if you're looking for damage, then you want to get that double damage, rage, intimidate. Those are all the big ones. Now, one big thing a lot of people are noticing about this build, what the heck? I'm not taking Multishot, but additional projectiles are the best thing in all the Path of Exile, the most important thing for all builds. I don't need this. I really do not feel like I need this. With a 2120 or just a 2020 Val Lightning Strike, we're getting 4 projectiles, which I feel is plenty because we're using Sniper's Mark. We are super crit capped without Assassin's Mark, so with Sniper's Mark, we're getting so many projectiles that I do not feel like it is needed. The way that Lightning Strike functions against Ubers is that even if you shoot out 500 projectiles, only one is going to hit, only one of the projectiles is going to hit, and also on the return, only one of the projectiles is going to hit. So adding more projectiles isn't going to improve your single target, and our clear is fine. Actually, something important to note with Lightning Strike, and I've spoken about this, is your placement to get the double hit. When you do that double hit, you kind of spawn like a phantom next to you that also hits the target. So the returning projectile is actually able to hit twice because the source of the second projectile is separate from you. So you're getting 2 hits. I think you're getting the melee hit, you're getting a projectile hit, and then the return, you can get 2 returning projectile hits. But don't get baited by thinking, oh, if I have 700 projectiles, they're all coming back and like converging on the boss and all hitting it. No, that's not how it works. Returning projectiles, only one of them can hit. You're not shotgunning the boss. So I do not feel like this is needed, really. That's just my 2 cents. Cluster Jewel. I've gone for a block cluster. There's quite a few good things you can get, but Precise Retaliation for a bit of crit chance, crit multi, martial prowess, accuracy, attack speed, damage, veteran defender, chance to, this is veteran defender for attributes and also resistances. There's a lot of other good things. Calamitous, I think, or that gives us chance to explode, but I will list out the various ones that are good. Just try and make sure that your final suffix is something useful. Fire res, intelligence, strength, something you need like that. And then as for the small cluster, one with the shield, giving us life on block. Very, very, very nice to get that. If you want to go for something like a Megalomaniac, that's absolutely fine. I actually, again, I was playing in private league, so I wasn't able to get a good one. But if you get a Megalomaniac with like 3 really good notables, absolutely go for it. But investigate, see what looks good for you, and grab it. As I said, the full PoB is linked in the description. I have a little mapping setup, a bossing setup, and a giga setup. By the way, this is all, I don't even have 30 rage. Unbound is off. You can see the damage is pretty unhinged. Also, Nimis return. I'm not sure if this should be like 100% more damage or not, but I'm just leaving it on 50. You can put this on 20. Turn off Unbound. But everything you need is here. I also have a fairly extensive notes section explaining things that are pretty useful. There's also mapping setup, mapping regex to block mods that you don't want. Tier 17 map mods to avoid. We have Massive Thread of Hope, explaining that. Large Thread of Hope, which I'm not using. Forbidden Flesh Flame. I didn't go over Master Surgeon because, I don't know. It's very hard to fit in if you're doing Uber bossing. It's really good with Tides of Time, but I don't know. I didn't ever feel like I could fit it in. And then Watcher's Eye mods, but it's all here for you. I'm going to leave it on the mapping setup. You can see the damage is looking super good. Our effective hit pool. This is extremely high because of our Svalinn, giving us 90%, 88% chance to block. But main thing to look at is the Fizz max hit. So this, like I said, is a truly well-rounded beast, capable of doing all content in the game. And then as for the Ascendancy, I've gone over this so much. Just read it, see what it does. I think that's going to be it. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everyone. Have a wonderful league. I'm going to go play some Deadlock or something for a while before PoE 2. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. Take care. And catch you in the next video. Bye.
Divine power! It's branching, Exile. You're making me nervous.